I will reveal one tool that has really assisted me in my career as a political analyst, and that is being extremely observant so as to notice small changes. Because experience has taught me that these seemingly small changes are not really small. Sometimes they are very big. And there is one change in President William Kipchirchir Samoei Ruto, which I will tell you about in a minute. First, let me give you a quick example of exactly what I'm talking about. In the year 2015, early 2016, I noticed that the then president, Uhuru Kenyatta, had stopped referring to his deputy president by his first name, William. And then I noticed other changes. There was a change in the body language. You know, body language never lies, can never lie. And of course that led me to start looking in the right places. And I started finding a lot of other things that had changed. To cut a very long story short, by the time I introduced my report that there was a very huge rift between President Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta and his deputy, most people, including those who had trusted me for years, dismissed me. One friend who had more faith in me than most came up with an idea. He said, if Ruto is still Uhuru's running mate in the 2017 general elections, then I was wrong. And if Uhuru picked another running mate to replace Ruto, then I was correct. You know what happened. And of course I was very wrong until I was right. Now the change in Ruto that I believe we should really pay attention to is that he has finally started listening to some advisors. Now, I know that Kizungu ilikuja na meli. But you see, you can listen and not hear. I am very sure all of us have experienced this. You're talking with somebody and you talk and you talk and you talk. But when they respond, it is very clear to you they did not hear a single word you said. Yeah, although they were listening. Anyway, I'm sure you'll agree with me, it is of great interest that we know who these advisors are who have the president's ear. Why? For a number of reasons, but top on the list, we will be able to predict State House moves, okay, with a lot of accuracy, just as I've been able to do over the last 2 weeks or so. And let us put these advisors into two categories. The first category is advisors or an advisor who does not have much experience or who do not have much experience, but they're loyal. They have always been loyal and they're trusted by the president. I have my suspicions on who this advisor or who these advisors are. Yeah, but I can't name them purely on suspicion. And the second category are very, very experienced advisors. Very experienced and very knowledgeable on world affairs and world politics, but with very little experience on Kenya. You know, if you don't have the experience about something, it is impossible to get the right feel. It is impossible to get a feel of what may be happening. And this may be crucial, especially in the crisis that the government is currently facing. A very serious crisis. Much more serious than most of us think. And yes, you guessed right. This second category are not Kenyans. They're foreigners. Now, with that information, you'll be able to understand very well the decisions this government has taken since this Gen Z crisis started. Has the advice been useful? Has it been effective? Has the regime of Ruto been effective in handling this crisis? Now it should be pretty obvious. The answer to all those questions is no. Clearly, this particular area of the presidency has had the same problem as this regime has had since it took power. And that is disorganization and doing things in a rather haphazard manner. In other words, not being organized. And I believe we all know that you cannot run a government effectively unless you're super organized. Because the way this has been done since the beginning of time, since the days of kings and queens, is that a ruler has specialist advisors. Effective leaders have even had particular think tanks full of specialists to advise on certain areas that are problematic to that particular regime. But the biggest blunder here, by far, is the fact that all these advisors looked in the wrong places, put emphasis in the very wrong places, failed to pay attention to the things that are terribly important. And I will come back to that in a minute. First, please allow me to go to Uhuru Park yesterday, Sabasaba Day, and confess something. Can you imagine? The Gen Zs made me cry. Yani, an old man like me, na heshima zangu, they caused me to cry. And you know why? They brought back to me very emotional memories from the past. Let me just give you an example. The very memorable day when we, the people of Kenya, defeated mighty Moi, with all his many bags of tricks, with all his experience in politics, and with all his state machinery. That was 2002. And indeed the climax of that also unfolded right there at the same venue at Uhuru Park, where we all very joyfully sang the song by a group called Gidi Gidi Majimaji, a song called Unbogable. Well, yesterday on Sunday, one of the two members of the group was there to lead the crowd of very enthusiastic Kenyans in that song once again. I couldn't bear it. And I could not help seeing another day in the future when Kenyan patriots will be back at Uhuru Park celebrating another win for the people against the dictatorial regime of Ruto, which will usher in the third and final liberation of the nation called Kenya. You know, it is not a small thing that this concert to honor the fallen patriots was very, very successful. Successful beyond the expectations of most. It was packed. In the same way Uhuru Park was packed that memorable day I'm talking about in the year 2002, when Moi handed over the instruments of power to Emilio Stanley Kibaki to be the third president of the Republic of Kenya. And apart from being very emotional and very effective in the fight for a better Kenya, very effective in this campaign of Ruto must go, it was also peaceful, very peaceful. And of course, predictably, some people could not bear it. And so there was some false information, especially on Twitter, indicating that those who attended the concert invaded town later and caused chaos. They didn't. They walked into town, danced around, even talked to the police, and dispersed peacefully. Actually, that should not have surprised those of us who understand the Ruto regime very well. Just like the breaking news this morning, claiming that the Medical Practitioners Union had shelved their protests, which were due to start this morning. The union later came out with a statement that somebody hacked into their Twitter account to spread this false information. Same old tactics, which are getting very boring. Yeah, but we should expect them, because we should never forget who we are dealing with. In my humble opinion, if there's anybody looking for confirmation that Ruto is going, then the Gen Z music concert at Uhuru Park to celebrate patriots who lost their lives during the protests was a very loud and visible confirmation. Because you see, as a ruler, as a president, you're ruling who? You're ruling the people. And if the people don't want you, and they're demonstrating it in such large numbers, how long do you think you can survive in power? Even with the so-called state machinery. It is not possible to rule people by force who do not want to be ruled by you, and they have lost the fear that would have stopped them expressing their real feelings about you and your regime. Back to the mess up with the advisors and the moves by the government so far to solve this crisis. Now, the wrong places where the focus was included defending key installations. Now, don't get me wrong. There is nothing wrong with defending key installations from angry protesters. But what I'm saying, that was not the priority these advisors convinced the president it was. For example, protesters invaded parliament. Did parliament cease to exist? Of course not. Now, I'm aware in another African country, when the people invaded the parliament in that country, the president of that country fled. Yeah, I believe it was Burkina Faso. But Kenya is not that country. The circumstances in Kenya right now are not the same as what happened in Burkina Faso. No, very different. The other wrong focus was assuming that if you scare protesters enough, after all these are only kids, this thing will end. And how do you scare them? Piga watu risasi. Tena, piga wengine risasi kwa kichwa. That should send a clear message which will stop this nonsense. Did it work? Of course not. In fact, it ended up being a great help to the other side, to protesters. I believe most Kenyans, including many analysts, have still not been able to grasp the impact on a regime of having the international press covering police brutality like this in great detail. Most of us have still not grasped the impact of that. Let me simplify it. After those images from Kenya, which has been the leading news item in many international media houses, it then quickly becomes a very serious internal political problem in those foreign countries to have a Kenyan leader visit those countries. Because how will the people who voted for that leader in that foreign country feel when they see the leader of the country where they have seen police brutality on the streets coming to visit, smiling and shaking hands with their leader? What do you think will be going through their minds? It is not an exaggeration to say that in some instances it can cause some of those leaders to lose an election and the popularity of their parties to fizzle out. That is how serious this thing is. And so, even if the guilty have still not been brought to book, this move did great damage to the government. Terrible advice. And not only did it not work, it has backfired big time. You see, this regime should have faced squarely their biggest problem. What they ended up focusing on was of no consequence. And their biggest problem is that politicians allied to this government can no longer make public appearances in peace. The president can no longer make public appearances in peace. That is the biggest problem. Because this is politics. You cannot rule the country and control everything while hidden in State House with very heavy security surrounding the place. Kenya is not a corporation. Kenya is a country, and this is politics. And Kenya is a democracy. The focus should have been getting back as much support as possible, as quickly as possible. Yeah, because now it is too late. And that is the nature of politics. Sometimes things move too fast at lightning speed. So much so that if you miss something, it is gone forever. You will never have any chance to recover. And I strongly believe that is exactly and precisely the position that the Ruto presidency is in right now. A point of no return. A point where you cannot come back. Impossible. And so now, it is only a matter of time. If the concert at Uhuru Park was anything to go by, also covered by the international media, then you will agree with me, it is too late. It is now just a matter of time. How long will it take for Ruto to leave office, resign with the entire regime? A few weeks? A few months? I don't believe anybody knows. But that does not change the fact that now it is only a matter of time. In other words, this government has run out of time. You know, in the past, when regimes have had a great crisis, they have always fallen back on tribe. Jomo Kenyatta did the same thing when there was a very big crisis after the assassination of popular cabinet minister, patriot Thomas Joseph Odhiambo Mboya, or simply known as Tom Mboya. Jomo Kenyatta's regime fled back to tribe, and it worked. But that was a very different time. Majority of Kenyans at that time were either illiterate or semi-illiterate. Is that true today? Of course not. And that's not all. There is something even more important that Kenyans have today that our ancestors at the time of Jomo Kenyatta did not have, and that is exposure. Kenyans are extremely knowledgeable. Kenyans are very much aware these days. Of course, the internet and social media has really speeded that up. And all this is not breaking news. It should be pretty obvious. But it appears that it was not obvious to a man who came on social media and started uttering threats to members of the House of Mumbi who are residing in the Rift Valley. And that poor mzee amepitwa na wakati sana. Because this revolution led by the Gen Z is completely tribeless. Because all tribes in Kenya currently are hungry. All tribes in Kenya currently are suffering from the policies of the Ruto regime. And therefore I can tell that mzee for free, it will not work. Never ever. Fanning tribal animosity today in Kenya will not work. Unless you can find at least one tribe that has not been affected by Ruto policies, has not been affected by the burdens of taxation made worse by a regime that does not want to hear what the people are saying. A regime that tells people, whether you like it or not, this finance bill will go through. To sum it all up, I think where the Ruto regime has reached, no advisor can help them. There is no advisor on the face of the planet that can help or save this regime. Allow me a reminder of the season we have entered for gifting Chris Kumekucha. You can see the details on your screens right now. I will not get tired of saying thank you to those of you who have already responded. And on my part, I rededicate myself to my purpose, which I believe is even more important because of the period in our history that we're in right now. I'm sure you know what I mean. Until next time, this is Chris Kumekucha.